A woman came to my office last week. 42 years old, successful professional. She had given 15 years of her life to a relationship she described as perfect. She cooked his favorite meals, remembered every important date, listened for hours as he talked about his work. She'd even turned down professional opportunities to support his projects, and yet he had left. The question she asked me haunts me still. What more could I have done? This question encapsulates a tragedy that repeats itself in millions of homes across the world. Women who give absolutely everything of themselves and discover it's not enough. Women who love with an intensity that hurts to the soul and still find themselves abandoned without apparent explanation. Not because they're deficient as people, not because they're not worth loving, but because there's something fundamental that no one has ever explained to them, something that operates in the shadows of every romantic interaction. Love, as we've traditionally understood it, as it's been sold to us in romantic movies and fiction novels, is merely the visible surface of something infinitely more complex and profound. And while we continue devotedly believing in that shiny but superficial surface, we continue losing relationships that could have been extraordinary, that could have lasted a lifetime. What I'm about to share with you in the next few minutes will make you deeply uncomfortable. It will challenge every belief you had about love and relationships, but it will also free you from an emotional struggle you never should have fought alone without the proper tools. Because there exists a masculine emotional code that operates silently in the depths of every relationship, powerfully influencing every decision he makes, every feeling he experiences, every moment of genuine closeness or inexplicable distance. And when you don't know this invisible code, when you don't understand how the masculine soul really works, you can give all your unconditional love and still feel him pulling away inexplicably. You can be the most devoted, understanding, loving woman in the entire world, and still watch him search for something indefinable that you can't identify or provide. You can love him to complete emotional and physical exhaustion and still not achieve that deep, lasting connection you desperately crave. After more than 3 decades meticulously observing this complex emotional dance between men and women, I've discovered something that will completely transform your way of understanding relationships forever. Men don't pull away because they stop loving sincerely. They pull away because their deepest, most fundamental emotional needs remain completely invisible, even to themselves most of the time. Needs that go far beyond traditional romantic love, that completely transcend physical passion, that touch such intimate and primitive fibers of the masculine soul, that when they're not adequately satisfied, they create an emotional void that no amount of conventional affection can ever fill. These aren't abstract romantic theories or superficial self-help concepts. These are concrete, scientifically verifiable neurological patterns that repeat over and over consistently in the fundamental masculine emotional structure. Evolutionary patterns that, once deeply understood and wisely applied, can turn an ordinary, predictable relationship into an extraordinary, irreplaceable connection. But they can also perfectly explain why so many wonderful, intelligent, loving women constantly feel as if they're speaking an emotional language that he simply doesn't understand or value. Let me take you now into the deepest territory of masculine psychology. The first of these fundamental emotional needs is so subtle it goes completely unnoticed in most relationships, but so incredibly powerful it can definitively determine the fate of any romantic bond. It's what I've termed through years of clinical research, the authentic confirmation of his essential value as a man. I'm not referring here to superficial, automatic respect, to those basic social courtesies we learn through family education or cultural pressure. I'm talking about something much deeper, more visceral, more transformative. The genuine, specific, deserved recognition of his fundamental capacity as a masculine being in the world. Imagine for a moment, if you can, that every day of your life, someone important systematically questioned your natural maternal competence, your innate feminine intuition, your instinctive capacity to emotionally nurture and create deep bonds with other human beings. Imagine that constantly, with the best intentions, they told you exactly how to do better, what you know how to do by nature, by instinct developed through millions of years of evolution. That constant feeling of subtle, persistent invalidation is exactly what many men experience daily in their relationships without anyone consciously realizing what's happening. The masculine brain, carefully molded by millions and millions of years of specific evolution, instinctively seeks emotional validation through direct recognition of its competence and capacity to effectively navigate the world. It's not artificially inflated ego. It's not learned cultural machismo. It's pure, primitive neurobiology, as basic as the need to breathe or eat. When a man deeply feels that his decisions are constantly questioned by the most important person in his life, that his natural judgment is systematically invalidated or corrected, that he's perceived as someone who needs to be constantly educated, directed, corrected as if he were an irresponsible teenager, something fundamental fractures irreparably in his emotional connection with you. But here is precisely where the vast majority of loving women become completely confused about the nature of this need. They mistakenly believe that recognizing his value as a man means blindly agreeing with absolutely everything he does, regardless of consequences. It's not that at all. It means something infinitely more sophisticated, more mature, more emotionally intelligent. It's the developed capacity to clearly see his genuine intentions, even when his specific actions are imperfect, incomplete, or directly wrong. It's really listening without immediately correcting. It's consciously allowing him to have his own natural process of learning and growth without automatically becoming his constant emotional supervisor, his perpetual teacher, his self-proclaimed moral guide. I vividly remember a specific conversation that completely changed my professional perspective on this dynamic. A brilliant, successful patient was telling me with visible frustration, he always makes exactly the same mistakes over and over. It's like he never learns from experience. I responded with a simple but revealing question. And when exactly was the last time you publicly recognized, out loud, some significant success he's had? The deep, uncomfortable silence that followed that question was absolutely revealing. She instantly realized she'd been literally spending years meticulously pointing out every flaw, every error, every wrong decision, and had completely forgotten to value, recognize, or celebrate his real virtues, his daily successes, his genuine efforts. Without consciously realizing it, she had gradually created a toxic dynamic where he was eternally the problematic student, and she the permanently disapproving, unsatisfied teacher. When a man authentically feels that his fundamental masculine essence is recognized and valued, especially after showing genuine emotional vulnerability or visibly failing at something important, an extraordinarily deep neurological response activates in his primitive brain. Oxytocin is massively released, the powerful emotional bonding hormone, but also dopamine in significant quantities that neurologically reinforces the connection with you as the primary source of emotional well-being and psychological stability. In that crucial moment, you're not simply someone who loves him romantically. You become something much more powerful, someone who genuinely sees him, who really values him, who deeply recognizes his authentic masculine essence. And this leads me directly to the second fundamental masculine emotional need, one I've called, after years of clinical observation, the primitive impulse of significant and valued contribution. Men desperately need to feel tangibly useful, but definitely not in the superficial, manipulative way that many people incorrectly imagine. It's not at all about faking artificial weakness or creating completely artificial problems for him to solve, as if it were an emotional video game. It's something much deeper, more authentic, more connected to the fundamental structure of masculine psychology. The masculine brain has specifically evolved over millions of years to respond with extraordinary emotional intensity when it can provide real, tangible value, when its physical and emotional presence generates a genuine, measurable difference in your overall well-being and quality of life. During countless millions of years of human evolution, men developed specific neurological circuits that literally light up like fireworks when they can effectively protect, solve real problems, or contribute significantly to the well-being of those they love. These aren't easily modifiable, learned cultural patterns. They're primitive brain structures that persist firmly regardless of all modern social changes. When a man clearly perceives that he can be your genuine emotional refuge in moments of crisis, your trusted advisor when you need perspective, your emotional strength when you face uncertainty or significant challenges, what contemporary neuroscientists scientifically identify as the transcendent purpose reward system activates. It's a deeply satisfying neurological sensation, more intense and lasting than temporary physical pleasure, more significant than any immediate, superficial satisfaction. I've witnessed absolutely extraordinary transformations in relationships that seem doomed to failure when the woman finally understands this fundamental masculine need. It's never about artificially diminishing yourself as a person, but about consciously allowing him to naturally grow in his specific, unique way of contributing real value to your life. An expression as genuine and authentic as, "I feel completely safe and calm when you share your ideas and perspective about this situation with me," can generate in him an infinitely deeper and more lasting emotional connection than 1,000 automatic declarations of "I love you," repeated without true feeling behind them. Let me explain now the absolutely crucial difference I've meticulously observed in my decades of professional practice. Men don't narcissistically want to be the absolute center of your personal universe, demanding constant attention like needy children. What they really crave in the depths of their being is to become your safe universe, your reliable emotional refuge. This apparently subtle distinction is absolutely fundamental to understanding authentic masculine psychology. When he genuinely feels he can offer you real emotional stability, that his presence naturally calms you, that his words carry significant weight in your important decision-making process, a visceral loyalty generates that completely transcends traditional romantic love. It becomes something much deeper, a mutual emotional need that transcends all normal daily emotional fluctuations. But there exists a third masculine emotional need, the most silent of all, the most systematically misunderstood by women, but also the most transformative when finally understood and properly honored. What I've termed, after years of intensive research, the sacred sanctuary of authentic vulnerability without judgment. This need operates in the most intimate depths of the masculine soul, in emotional territories where very few women have been genuinely invited to enter. Our modern Western culture has created something absolutely devastating for healthy emotional development in men: the systematic prohibition of authentic emotional expression. From earliest childhood, men are consistently taught that showing complex emotions directly equals showing unacceptable social weakness. Don't cry like a girl. Be strong always. Real men aren't afraid of anything. These apparently protective but profoundly damaging phrases meticulously build what in clinical psychology we technically know as learned masculine emotional anesthesia, the artificially developed inability to recognize, healthily process, and appropriately express complex, nuanced emotions. The final result of this cultural conditioning is absolutely devastating, but remains completely invisible to most people. Many men reach adulthood chronically emotionally anesthetized, desperately hiding deep internal battles behind constant humor, protective silence, or apparent studied indifference. It's not that they genuinely don't feel anything, it's that they've painfully learned through years of social conditioning that feeling openly is emotionally dangerous, that authentic vulnerability is a direct door to social rejection or total loss of others' respect. When a fortunate man finally finds an emotional space where he can be completely vulnerable without any fear of immediate judgment, where he can honestly express, "I'm completely emotionally exhausted. I have deep fear of failing at this. I honestly don't know how to handle this complex situation," without someone well-intentioned immediately trying to fix it, advise him, or minimize his feelings, something absolutely extraordinary happens in his fundamental nervous system. The parasympathetic system massively activates. Not only is oxytocin released in significant quantities, but also serotonin and natural endorphins. Neurologically speaking, he feels more genuinely safe with you than anywhere else in the entire world. But there exists a significant emotional obstacle that very few women consciously recognize or really understand. By natural maternal instinct, by personal anxiety, or by the completely genuine desire to help and protect, many women automatically respond to authentic masculine vulnerability by immediately trying to solve the problem, offer unsolicited advice, or console prematurely. Don't worry so much about that. Everything's going to be perfectly fine. You should definitely try doing this or that. Matu, without consciously realizing the emotional consequences, they're effectively closing the door of the emotional refuge he so desperately needs. The mature capacity to simply be silently present with his emotional pain without compulsively trying to change or fix it immediately is a genuinely advanced emotional skill that requires considerable emotional maturity and developed conscious self-control. Intentionally allowing shared silence to communicate deeply, that physical presence gradually heals, that unconditional acceptance slowly mends, is consciously holding the sacred emotional space without invading it with your own needs, without compulsively colonizing it with your own maternal control or protection needs. When a man experiences this type of genuinely unconditional acceptance of his complete humanity, specifically including his acknowledged weaknesses, his deepest fears, his moments of total confusion, he not only falls more intensely in love with you as a person, he bonds with you at a level that completely transcends all traditional romantic love experience. It's a primitive bond that directly touches basic emotional survival, that becomes a need as fundamental as breathing, as eating, as sleeping. I've observed something absolutely fascinating during my decades of intensive clinical practice. The relationships that genuinely last multiple decades aren't necessarily those where there's more initial physical passion or obvious superficial compatibility, but specifically where these three fundamental masculine emotional needs are deeply understood and consistently honored authentically. Romantic love becomes the natural result, not the artificially forced starting point. But an absolutely crucial question inevitably arises. Why exactly are these fundamental masculine emotional needs so systematically ignored by women who love sincerely and deeply? The answer lies in an emotional projection error we commit completely unconsciously. We've been culturally educated to automatically give what we personally want to receive. Women emotionally connect mainly through direct verbal expression of affection, instinctive maternal care, constant emotional attention. We naturally offer exactly what we value in our own feminine emotional system. Men, however, operate with a completely different emotional system developed through millions of years of specifically masculine evolution. They connect deeply through authentic recognition of their capacity through the tangible sensation of significant purpose, and through emotional safety to show their complete humanity without fear of rejection. They're emotional languages that may initially seem incompatible, but are actually deeply complementary when properly understood and applied with mature emotional wisdom. For years as a therapist, I genuinely tried to convince my patients that intense love should automatically be sufficient to sustain any human relationship. I was applying my own personal romantic projection to an infinitely more complex and nuanced emotional reality. The uncomfortable but liberating truth is that love without deep understanding inevitably becomes insufficient. Love without real emotional connection becomes fragile. Love without these three fundamental emotional pillars becomes dangerously vulnerable to any external crisis. It's not simply that men are more complicated or simpler than women in emotional terms. It's about honestly recognizing that they function with a different emotional operating system meticulously developed through millions and millions of years of specifically masculine evolution. And when a woman genuinely understands this system, she doesn't need to desperately compete based on temporary physical appearance, fading youth, or unattainable perfection. She becomes something much more powerful, emotionally irreplaceable, because she connects directly with the deepest needs of the authentic masculine soul. This never implies that you should sacrifice your personal authenticity or fundamentally change your natural feminine essence. It means consciously expanding your emotional intelligence to include a more sophisticated understanding of how human connection works at its highest possible expression. It means recognizing that genuinely mature love requires much more than intense feelings. It requires emotional wisdom, consciously cultivated through experience, careful observation, and the humility to constantly learn. I've been a direct witness to women who, after entire decades of consistently frustrating relationships, finally integrate these fundamental principles and experience infinitely deeper, more stable connections than any passionate romance of their youth. Because genuinely mature love isn't based on blind passion or neurotic emotional dependence, but on deep understanding and the developed capacity to nurture the other's real needs without completely losing yourself in the process. When these three emotional needs are being authentically and consistently satisfied, something absolutely extraordinary happens in the primitive masculine brain. The same neural circuits activate that were active during childhood when he felt completely safe, unconditionally valued, and totally accepted. It's a positive emotional regression that generates not only temporary romantic attraction, but a visceral loyalty that completely transcends all changing external circumstances. Genuine recognition of his essential value communicates directly at a neurological level. Your specific way of being a man has real, irreplaceable value in my life. And conscious activation of his sense of significant contribution clearly transmits, your presence generates a tangible, measurable difference in my overall well-being. Creation of the authentic vulnerability sanctuary allows him to deeply experience, I can be completely human with you, without protective masks, without social performance. When a man experiences these three elements consistently and authentically, love stops being a conscious choice he must constantly renew through willpower. It becomes an inevitable neurological response, an emotional need as basic and fundamental as physical safety. It's not calculated emotional manipulation, it's deep understanding applied with personal integrity. The difference between a relationship that genuinely endures and one that gradually fades doesn't lie in the intensity of initial love, nor in obvious superficial compatibility, nor in the magical absence of conflicts. It lies specifically in the emotional wisdom to consciously identify and nurture the deepest needs of the human soul, respecting the neurological and evolutionary differences that make us unique as genders. Love alone will never be sufficient to sustain a long-term relationship. But love wisely combined with deep understanding of the most intimate human needs, with emotional intelligence to nurture the soul in addition to the heart, that love becomes truly invincible against any external challenge. Women who master these principles don't live in constant competition with other women. They don't fear the inevitable passage of time. They don't anguish over every normal emotional fluctuation in their relationship. Because they've built something infinitely more solid than momentary passion. They've built an emotional bond that deepens with mutual understanding, that strengthens with each crisis overcome together, that becomes more necessary and valuable with each shared year. When you master the art of authentic masculine emotional connection, when you understand his deepest needs and nurture them with wisdom and consistency, love stops being an exhausting struggle to maintain his attention and interest. It transforms into a natural dance where both find in the other not just a romantic partner, but an emotional refuge that makes all external challenges infinitely more manageable. Because when you manage to satisfy the deepest emotional needs of the masculine soul authentically and consistently, you don't just conquer his temporary heart, you conquer his lasting loyalty. And emotional loyalty born from deep understanding is the only thing that really transcends time, adverse circumstances, and the inevitable challenges that every lasting relationship must face to become something extraordinary. Now, there exists a fundamental difference I've observed over these years between women who apply these principles superficially as manipulative techniques and those who integrate them from genuine authenticity. Men possess an almost supernatural ability to detect the difference between forced and authentic recognition, between calculated and genuine admiration, between emotional space created by strategy and that offered from real understanding. The difference lies in intention. When you apply these principles from true love, from the genuine desire to understand and connect, they become something natural, organic, inevitable. When you apply them as techniques to control or retain someone, they become transparent and counterproductive. Not all men are ready for this level of connection. There are relationships that aren't meant to work, men who aren't emotionally or psychologically available for this type of connection, situations where fundamental incompatibility is real. What these principles do guarantee is that you'll have the peace of mind of knowing you've given your best, that you've operated from understanding rather than blind intuition, that you've built something solid rather than something based on romantic illusions. And if a relationship doesn't work, despite authentically applying these principles, you'll have the clarity to recognize that the problem wasn't you, that it wasn't your inability to love correctly. You'll have the wisdom to know it simply wasn't the right connection, that you were destined for something better, for someone who can value and reciprocate the level of emotional understanding you're offering. Because when you truly understand these principles, when you live them from authenticity, you become a woman who not only knows how to love, but how to be loved in the way you deserve. You become someone who doesn't accept less than what she can give, who doesn't settle for superficial connections when she has the capacity to create extraordinary bonds. And that, ultimately, is the greatest gift of this understanding. Not just the capacity to transform your relationships, but the capacity to transform yourself in the process. To become the woman who not only conquers hearts, but builds emotional homes. Who not only inspires love, but generates loyalty. Who not only attracts passion, but cultivates connections that transcend time itself. Because in the end, after decades of observing the human soul at its maximum vulnerability, I've reached an irrefutable conclusion. True love isn't something that simply happens. It's something that's consciously built day by day, decision by decision, with the wisdom of one who understands that loving isn't enough. You have to know how to love. And when a woman possesses this wisdom, when she understands these three fundamental pillars of the masculine soul, she doesn't just change her relationship, she changes her destiny, because she becomes the woman that men not only desire, but need to feel completely alive. That woman is you. Now that you know the code, the question is no longer whether he'll choose you. The question is whether you'll choose to become the woman who understands, who connects, who transforms. The love you seek is waiting for you on the other side of this understanding.